Thank you, RF Kolkata, for making me part of, making me the moderator for this great session. This is certainly a lot of the aspects around BIMSTEC, Bay of Bengal, have been discussed over the last day and a half. Today, I think the discussion, especially this particular session, is something that perhaps from my research point of view is the most interesting part in terms of where does Bay of Bengal, where do we situate Bay of Bengal in the wider discussion on the Indo-Pacific, and what role potentially it can and cannot play in the geopolitical imagining, reimagining, as it were, that is going on in the wider Indo-Pacific, as well as in this part of the world where we have seen some back and forth between SAARC and BIMSTEC, what role potentially BIMSTEC can play, what role Bay of Bengal can play, and what role perhaps India and other partner countries in the region together can play in shaping the wider, not only the discourse on the Indo-Pacific, but also the operational realities that today exist in this part of the world that is dynamic, that is changing ever so rapidly, and that is also becoming very clear, as we have seen over the course of the last year, in fact, that a lot of the questions, a lot of the assumptions that we had taken on board in defining the geopolitical and geoeconomics of this region will have to be we will have to rethink some of those assumptions as we move forward. I have a great panel with me today, where we have scholars and researchers, practitioners looking at this from multiple vantage points. And without further ado, let me invite Alex Waterman from University of Leeds to be our first speaker of this session, of this panel. Alex, over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Pant. Hope everyone is doing well. Good afternoon to you all from the UK. Hope you're all keeping safe and well. So first of all, I'd just like to thank everyone for organising this wonderful event. I began my journey of deep study into looking at the Northeast India in 2014 for my PhD, and I'm thus very honoured to take part in this very enriching and educational experience. So the area around which I was asked to speak today concerns one of the key questions which stems from the concept note, which is to what extent will the development of trade in the Northeast be compatible with the security imperatives of the region? So I guess I'm thinking about it in more of a kind of intra-regional perspective. So in my discussion, I won't cover the geopolitical aspects to a huge extent, and this is because you can see on the Racina debates on the ORF, Bertil Lintner has written some excellent stuff on this, and so I signpost you to that for a primer on that. Other pivotal security concerns that need to be taken into account include aspects such as illicit border flows, such as smuggling, drug trafficking, illegal migration that concern Northeast India. Another important area is the significance of conflict in the areas bordering the Northeast region, so the bearing of armed groups such as the Arakan Army on connectivity projects such as the Kaladan Project Initiative, for example. What I'd like to do today in particular is explore the question of security imperatives within Northeast India and reflect a little on the extent to which the development of healthy, flourishing trade is compatible with the law and order and security dynamics present in the region. So since my focus, I predominantly come from the study of insurgency in Northeast region. Much of my discussion will orient around that and the continuing challenges that lie ahead in this sense. So those of you, many of you are better versed than I in Northeast matters, but we'll be all familiar with the fact that insurgency has witnessed a sustained decline in Northeast India since the 2010s. Ministry of Home Affairs data from the most recent annual reports show that insurgency-related fatalities have dropped from around the 300s in 2012 down to 37 in 2019, declining again to around 25 in 2020. So this has led to a lot of optimism that insurgency is reaching a final and sustained decline in the region. And there's a lot to be optimistic about in this sense. So last year, the third Bodo Accord marked the final surrender of remaining anti-talks components of the Bodo insurgency of Western Assam, and the peace accord there has been hailed as marking an end to that conflict. On the 23rd of February this year, militants from 5 Karbi Anglong based militant groups in Assam surrendered before the authorities although this did not translate into a peace accord in the same way that the Bodo Accord did. The vast majority of the Naga armed groups, widely known as the mother of insurgency in the region, given their role in linking up with other movements, providing training, supplying arms, etc., and their position on the Indian-Myanmar boundary, they continue to hold peace talks with the Indian government. And all the while, the remaining anti-talks factions of groups from Manipur, Nagaland, Assam, for example, were quite significantly dislocated in the past couple of years following Myanmar military operations against them during 2019 in particular. Yet even with this quite optimistic scenario, it's important to note that the challenges of developing trade and establishing connectivity are likely to remain salient. And conflict is likely to continue to have a bearing on many of these issues that we're discussing. So although, for example, insurgency-related fatalities in the northeast have reduced, violence tends to be dominated by a fairly depressing but normalised pattern of violence and intimidation against civilians, businesses, contractors, infrastructure projects. These kinds of patterns of violence reflect a continuing political economy of low-lying insurgency in the region, which is arguably one of the greatest issues to realising this vision of a key role for India's northeast in BIMSTEC. So, according to the latest Ministry of Home Affairs annual report, while I think 369 people were kidnapped in the region in 2014, 108 were in 2019, and this figure has been holding fairly steady for the previous years before that. So this is a reduction, however, nothing like the near tenfold reduction that we see in the fatalities data, and I think that tells us a story. So non-lethal violence remains fairly commonplace. Placing detonating grenades, small IEDs outside businesses, contractor residences, particularly regular, for example, in the Imphal municipal area, while similar forms of intimidation can be seen in other areas such as Nagaland's commercial capital of Dimapur and the border town of Moreh on the India-Myanmar border. Kidnapping of contractors remains commonplace, and there are numerous reports of violence against road and rail construction workers, which often hamper construction projects. So in December 2020, for example, a National Investigation Agency investigation into intimidation and extortion in Manipur revealed the existence of a well-organised extortion racket around intimidating road construction companies and taxing them, etc. The proposed railway connection linking Myanmar to the rest of India via Assam through the capital of Imphal and then out to the border town of Moreh, which is where around a large percentage of officially sanctioned land-based trade with Myanmar takes place. It's long been the target of kidnappings, extortion demands, and from multiple armed groups. And indeed, the largest Naga armed group, which remains in peace talks with the Indian government, the National Socialist Council of Nagalim, as it Moiva, along with up to 16 other armed groups, has a presence on some of these all-weather highways connecting the border town of Moreh to Imphal and then to Nagaland, giving them this continued, even though they are in peace talks with the government, giving them this continued ability to disrupt goods flows and trade connectivity. So I think in 2018, for example, reports emerged that trucks transporting goods from these border areas were increasingly being threatened along the highways, which had the effect of driving up commodity prices, and ultimately it's business communities that bear the brunt of these forms of extortion, and this then feeds into consumer prices, damaging the local economy, and while continuing to drive this political economy of conflict. And thus there needs to be, when we're thinking about these issues, there needs to be an element of care in thinking about these, and we need to be careful to think about how connectivity projects, how they interact with this political economy. So, because it continues to exist and it continues to put up hurdles and significant barriers, despite, very good reasons for optimism regarding peace in the region. So there needs to be a kind of an element of care in thinking about these issues. And that was the main kind of point that I wanted to draw our attention to today. And I'm really looking forward to everyone else's contributions thinking about this in a wider regional perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. And I see that Indrani has joined. So welcome, Indrani. You made it here eventually. I think I also see Madhu Chanda. Dr. Ghosh is also here. Welcome, Dr. Ghosh. Thank you, Alex. It was, I think, to begin with, this was really putting this entire discussion in the context of the idea that Northeast can be potentially a gateway for India to the wider Southeast Asia, and therefore connect more organically South Asia and Southeast Asia. This I think the political economy of violence that you underscored perhaps had to be taken into account when we are looking at some of the costs and benefits of what it means for Bay of Bengal to be becoming that kind of a stepping stone that is part of the larger conversation for this day. So thank you for that. Let me bring in Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay, who is, of course, a distinguished diplomat, but now with Center for Policy Research, for his contribution. Ambassador, floor is all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Pant. It's a great pleasure to be here. Let me thank the ORF Kolkata as well as the Consul General of Japan in Kolkata for organizing this event and for thinking of inviting me, and also to you, Dr. Pant, as the sort of distinguished moderator. So let me say that, it's the idea of the Bay of Bengal as a stepping stone to the Indo-Pacific is a relatively new idea. But it's something that I've been talking about for quite some time in a series of lectures. And because we have very little time here, so let me just draw your attention to these lectures posted in the CPR website under my bio. And they consist of 3 lectures. One is India ASEAN at 25/50. That was the commemorative summit. Act East, Northeast, and the Indo-Pacific amidst a pandemic. And I think they generally cover the kind of issues that I'm going to be referring to. Of course, largely these have been in the context of the Northeast and the Indo-Pacific, but also there has been a component about the Bay of Bengal. And since I've been asked to speak basically in this section on Bay of Bengal and the Indo-Pacific, I'm going to start off by very quickly covering the Bay of Bengal aspect of the stepping stone to the Indo-Pacific. But I hope that I'll have a little bit of time to come back to the issues of the Northeast and make a few more analytical statements, particularly because there's been both a lot of hype and hope about the connectivity between the Act East and Northeast that I don't think has been fully realized. There are lots of buzzwords floating about there. Connectivity is one big buzzword. There is the Northeast trade development. But in actual fact, there's very little connection with productivity. So there's a lot of talk about connectivity, but very little actual action on productivity to be able to make the Northeast much more a viable, not just a transit route, but actually a viable contributor to India's Act East, and also a bridge between India and Southeast Asia. And of course, more recently, we have been hearing a lot of talk about the Bay of Bengal and the blue economy. But once again, it's been mostly a lot of talk and very little action. So that's kind of general assessment that I'd like to make. When we turn to the Bay of Bengal, I think there's been generally a tendency to look at the Bay of Bengal in terms of the Indian Ocean trade, essentially the trade from the Arabian Sea or even beyond the Suez Canal down through the 8-degree channel and into the Straits of Malacca and the South China Sea, and eventually to the major East Asian economies. Of late, there has been a little bit of attention to Andaman as a possible kind of hub or a transit point. And you are all aware of the discussions around Sabang. I actually think that Medan would have been a much better sort of hub for the Indian Ocean trade between India and Indonesia, mainly because it's already a port and it's already an industrialized region. Sabang is a completely virgin island, and to create the kind of hinterland and the capacities would take much longer, whereas in Medan they are actually there. But of late we have been seeing, and I think in the first session, Ambassador Tariq Karim made a couple of strong points about both the relationship of the of Bangladesh and of the northeast with the Bay of Bengal and the role of the inland waterways in that, and particularly it was in the context of the colonial economy, about which I'll have something to say. And more recently, there's been a little talk in terms of coastal shipping. Again, actually, most of the coastal shipping discussion has been mostly discussion. There is very little action on the ground. Perhaps the great white hope there is, the Sitwe port, which has apparently just been made operational very recently. But let's be aware of the limitations of the Sitwe port. The Sitwe port is at the mouth of the Kaladan estuary. It gets very easily silted. It has a very low draft. Its hinterland is generally limited to the southern portion of the northeast and the rest of Rakhine. It's not a very large hinterland, and it was conceived of at a time when we didn't really have transit and connectivity through Bangladesh. And as transit and connectivity through Bangladesh has improved, in fact, the attractiveness of the Kaladan route actually will recede. Nevertheless, it's an important project in the sense that it provides a certain redundancy, just in case there are problems on the Bangladesh side, or for that matter on the Chicken's Neck. It's good to have a third alternative. To the Indo-Pacific. By and large, the Patkai, have I disappeared? Yeah, the Patkai range as well as the Arakan Yoma are significant barriers to trade. They sort of raise the cost of trade from there. But I would actually like to draw attention to, I think, 2 or 3 other ports in the Bay of Bengal, in the Myanmar coast of the Bay of Bengal, that have great potential, but that have not even been really seriously looked at. Chofu, of course, is a port that the Chinese have now put their mark on. So Chofu is unavailable. Chofu is a far better port than Sitwe. It's one of the best natural harbors in the entire Bay of Bengal, something that was known to the British from the early 20th century and written about. But clearly this was not something that was offered or talked about, and we had no opportunity to get into it. Perhaps the Chinese, at the period when they had a great deal of influence on Myanmar, locked that particular port, and it was simply not available to anyone else. But Myanmar in the last USDP regime, in the period between 2011 and 2015, opened 2 other. Chofu was one special economic zone, but they also opened 2 other special economic zones. One of which has started, which is the Telava special economic zone at outside Yangon, and a second one that has been sputtering, off and on, which is the port at Dawei, the old Tavoy of the British colonial trade. Now, Telava is in fact already quite well connected with through Miyawadi with Thailand, and therefore is a very good route for Indian investment in the special economic zone, looking at markets both within ASEAN and beyond ASEAN to the South China Sea, and from South China Sea to the East Asian economies. And not only East Asian economies, it could even be the Russian Far East. And the way, of course, the Telava has been done in collaboration with the Japanese. The way started off as a collaboration with a Thai company. They were unable to secure financial composure, and since then there have been discussions with the Japanese and others to try and start this. But in my view, almost none of these ports, including Chofu, but particularly Dawei is due east of Chennai. And the ports of the East Coast, and it would be a very good hub and transshipment point for value chain economies from East Asia, Southeast Asia, and Eastern India, and beyond Eastern India to the West Coast and the Gulf and Africa, even Europe. But it is extraordinarily strange, actually, that neither the Myanmar nor the Thai, who were original partners, or for that matter, Japan, have really approached and tried to draw India into this particular value chain linkage through the way. I personally have been to all these points, and I think there is quite a lot of potential to develop that. So I think on the Bay of Bengal, I leave it at this, but I'll just actually turn to the Northeast, because very often in the context of the Northeast, we automatically assume that Act East, which was originally formulated in the context of an exhortation for India as a whole to look to the growing economies of Southeast Asia and East Asia in order to drive its own economy. And of course, there was a particular geopolitical context which remains, which is that the west of us still remains unstable, whereas the east has been, barring the recent developments in Myanmar and Thailand, have been relatively stable. But we can look at the efficacy or the success of the Act East in many ways, but I think one of the most tangible ways to look at it is to look at trade development and investment. And if we look at trade development and investment, we have actually invested something like close to 700 to 800 million, or have committed 700 to 800 million in connectivity projects between the Northeast and Southeast Asia through the Trilateral Highway and the Kaladan project, and also the related projects, bridges and so on. But if we look at the trade, there is nothing. And part of the reason is, of course, the very long logistic lines between the industrialist part of India and the markets of Southeast Asia, which is from Yunnan. But part of the fact is that simply, while we have been talking about trade, investment, connectivity, and so on, the Northeast really is not a productive economy in spite of its natural bounty, in spite of an abundance of land, water, sun, forests, and agricultural land as well. It has no exports. And I think the most dramatic statistic that I can point to you is during the period of border trade, the border trade accounted for close to, not more than 2 or 3% of the India-Myanmar trade at that particular time. In 2016, we switched from border trade to MFN trade, but we did not set up the infrastructure for most favored nation trade, including duties. In 2018, we formally inaugurated the integrated check post at More. But if you look at the Land Port Authority of India website, which manages the ICP at More, under imports, there are no imports, and under exports, updated only until June 2019, there is only one transaction of chemicals from much deeper into India for $240,000. So we have invested close to $750 million in connectivity for trade, effectively dutiable trade worth $240,000. And it is not that there is no trade, but as you all know, all the trade since the movement from border trade to MFN trade, all trade is now informal. Originally, border trade was for a limited set of 60 plus. You do not have the infrastructure for third country origin inspection and for duties. All the goods, that means most favored nation goods, come in through the informal route. The quantity is unrecorded, but it's an explosion. It is now linked to a lot of vested interests, both from the underground as well as from other agencies. The government gets absolutely no duty for those products. 90% of that is third country goods, not from Myanmar. Most of them are consumer goods. There are some power tools and others which you can say are productive. But if you go through the towns of Manipur today, the most visible sign of it are markets selling second-hand Chinese clothes. So if the whole idea of our Act East and of our connectivity projects and our spending 750 to 800 million is to import cheap Chinese second-hand clothes, certainly that is nowhere there in our official statements. And we need to look at that very closely. There's much more that one could say, but I think I've already exceeded my time. I just wanted to make that point that there is something dysfunctional, and that the reason for that is simply that we are still operating in the colonial economy that Ambassador Tariq Karim spoke about yesterday. The main economy of the Northeast is still based on tea, oil. Timber has, of course, made way for some other agricultural goods, but otherwise it is coal, tea, oil, and rice. And remember, the labor for all these occupations came from outside the Northeast. Now, 70 to 75% of the people of the Northeast and their livelihoods depend on the agri-horti, fishing, rural forestry, and other sectors. We simply have not invested enough in the livelihoods and the primary economy, and the processing economy of the primary products in the Northeast to be able to create exportable goods that can make the Northeast productive. So I think this whole buzzword about connectivity is hollow unless it is accompanied by an emphasis on productivity, and emphasis on productivity not in terms of the industrial goods that you produce in the West Coast or in the heartland of India, but in the natural economy of the region, which incidentally follows the topography, the geography, and the natural drainage of the region and flows out into the Indian Ocean. It is much more difficult to conduct trade through the Patkai ranges, which have historically been a barrier to anything but military campaigns and mass migration, than it is to do it through the Bay of Bengal. And that Bay of Bengal route has been largely closed thanks to a colonial legacy and partition and the problems that we have had since that time. And obviously the answer to that is both a focus on the natural economy of the region, focused on the agri-rural sector, as well as better transit and connectivity through Bangladesh, which fortunately has been happening of late. I'd make one final point talking about the Northeast. There's a lot of emphasis on connectivity to Southeast Asia, but Northeast does not have its own airlines. It does not have a Northeast hub in the Northeast for its airlines. No two capitals in the Northeast other than Guwahati and Shillong are easily or well connected, either by air or by road or by rail. So that, in fact, the Northeast itself is not connected. And the connectivity of the Northeast with the rest of India also needs a lot of room for improvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. That was wonderful in terms of just giving us a reality check and also pointing out some of the dysfunctionalities that you talked about, both in terms of economic and productivity aspects, as well as I think even when you are thinking of connectivity and when we are thinking of how the Bay of Bengal potentially becoming this stepping stone for the wider Indo-Pacific, what are the challenges both internally in the context of Northeast and also this I think tags with very well with Alex's discussion earlier in terms of how we can improve the political economy of the region and think about it both when we are thinking of either of Bay of Bengal or in terms of wider connectivity with the Indo-Pacific. With that, let me invite Dr. Madhuchanda Ghosh, Assistant Professor at Presidency University, for her comments. Dr. Ghosh.
Hello, Harsh. Am I audible? Okay, thank you very much for having me invited. Today, my analysis would essentially look into, India's Act East policy and Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, which in Japanese expression is Jiyu de Akareta Indo Taiheyo Koso. These two visions, how they are converging in this key geostrategic subregion of the Bay of Bengal. In doing so, I would look into the factors which have contributed to the Indo-Japanese strategic convergence in this region, and I would also look into the expanding bilateral strategic cooperation for bolstering the regional maritime security in the Bay, and finally I would have some concluding remarks as well. To begin with, I would like to point out to this development that the Bay of Bengal has become an arena where the interests of the great powers and the littoral states are beginning to intersect in a more intensive way and make it one of the most contested zones in the Eastern Hemisphere. While the realists analyze the shifting geopolitics in this region through the prism of balancing, bandwagoning, and hedging strategies, the liberals tend to perceive the region through the notions of new institutional setting and regional engagement, while the constructivists tend to view the emerging regional dynamics within the broader framework of such ideational constructs as the Indo-Pacific based on shared values and a common identity in the region. We have also scholars like John Hemmings, Van Jackson, and others who have pointed out that foreign policy issues of states are increasingly multidimensional in character, and states are incentivized to conform to multiple, sometimes competing hierarchies, which equates to a hedge. Now, in the Bay of Bengal's fluid geopolitical scenario, the key Indo-Pacific maritime states in the region, we see they are caught up in a complex web of deepening economic dependencies as well as growing security uncertainties. Now, strategically located in the middle of the Indo-Pacific region, we find that the Bay of Bengal has assumed a critical importance for the Indo-Pacific maritime powers, including India and Japan. Now, with regard to the factors shaping the Indo-Japanese strategic convergence in this region, we find that both India and Japan, they exhibit a strong intent to promote a rules-based regional order as envisioned in India's Act East policy, India's Sagar Doctrine, the IPOI and Japan's FYP, which all focus on inclusivity, connectivity and enhancing the regional cooperation. Now, India's Sagar Doctrine clearly indicates India's vision of inclusivity, which is of course in stark contrast to the unilateral strategic behavior of powers like China. The structural changes in the regional security environment, the growing power disequilibrium in this region, the need for promoting a rules-based regional order, freedom of navigation, emerging traditional and non-traditional security challenges are some of the key factors shaping the India-Japan strategic partnership in the Bay of Bengal. Now, the convergence of India and Japan's strategic interests in the Bay of Bengal seem to be based on three factors. Energy, one is maritime security, the other is energy security, and freedom of navigation. As a strategic waterway linking the Indian and the Pacific Oceans, the Bay of Bengal is the main route for energy trade with East Asia. Now, thousands of container ships and oil tankers cross the bay around the tip of Sri Lanka and India en route to and from China, Japan, and other East and Southeast Asian countries via this Malaccan Strait, which is the vital lifeline for trade as well as energy supplies for both India and Japan. The Malaccan Strait, it constitutes Japan's main trade route from Europe and the Middle East. The bay's close proximity to the Malaccan Strait makes it strategically vital for both India and Japan. Now, the ensuing security challenges in the region, like sea piracy, proliferation of WMDs, China's growing military assertiveness in the region, are some of the core strategic concerns which India and Japan both share. Now, in this context, it needs to be noted that a major structural shift to the Indo-Pacific security landscape today is the rise of China as a comprehensive national power. As China seeks to carve out a new Sino-centric order in the region facilitated by its BRI, it is increasingly shaping the regional geopolitical and geoeconomic landscape. So it's noteworthy that through its maritime connectivity project, particularly the MSRI, China's focus on acquiring naval facilities along the crucial choke points in the Indian Ocean region to enhance its strategic presence has created security worries for New Delhi and Tokyo, because Beijing's acquisition and construction of ports could serve a dual purpose. The commercial ports could be used as military facilities for the Navy to help mitigate China's geographical disadvantages in the region and expand plans' footprint in the region. And it is, as evident from plans, growing presence of, Chinese nuclear submarines, which is again a cause of concern for New Delhi. Now, with regard to the expanding strategic cooperation between India and Japan in this region for bolstering the maritime security, focus on Bengal has been growing significantly in the aftermath of this rescue of the Japanese oil cargo MV Londra Rainbow by the Indian Coast Guard. For instance, Japan's Sahyog Kaijin exercises with the Indian Coast Guards in the Bay to gauge interoperability focus on anti-piracy and search and rescue operations. In 2017, Japan's large warship Izumo joined the Malabar exercises in the Bay alongside India's INS Vikramaditya. The revival of the Japan-India maritime exercise called the GMEX in 2018, after a lapse of 5 years, it indicates growing concerns in the two states.
Dr. Ghosh, I think there's some problem. Dr. Ghosh, sorry to bother you. There is some problem with your audio.
Okay, then perhaps I will just keep the video off and then I can continue, perhaps.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. That's great. Thank you. The revival of the GMEX in 2018 after a lapse of 5 years, it indicates the growing concerns of the two states with regard to the threats to the freedom of navigation and respect for a rules-based order. Now, Japan has assumed, in fact, key importance in India's maritime strategy as New Delhi seeks massive foreign direct investment in its Sagar-Mala project for the upgradation of its maritime infrastructure and port-led industrial development. And Japan has offered partnership for quality infrastructure to India, which focuses, and other regional states, which focuses on providing economically feasible and transparent alternatives to Chinese-sponsored connectivity projects. Now, Japan is investing in upgrading infrastructure in Andaman and Nicobar Islands, the ANI, which constitute India's key strategic outposts in the western approaches to the Malaccan Strait. And ANI has the potential to play a critical role in enhancing the maritime security of the Bay of Bengal region, particularly in furthering maritime domain awareness, or the MDA, for monitoring the movements of the subsurface vessels along the Malacca Strait. The MDA through the Andaman is critical. Now, and in this context, it is important to note that amidst the China's encroachment in the Galwan Valley, the Indian Navy is conducting joint naval exercises with the Japanese maritime self-defense forces in the IOR along the Malacca Strait, followed by the Indo-US naval exercises in the ANI, is quite symbolic. It signifies New Delhi's balancing strategies vis-a-vis China, flexing maneuvers in India's northeastern territory and its maritime neighborhood. It also indicates that India is re-evaluating ANI's role as a critical military base. The cutting-edge technology developed by Japan in the HADR and search and rescue operations has also been factored into India's intent to deepen its maritime cooperation with Japan. Now, India, and in conclusion, I can say that India and Japan have high stakes in the regional stability of the Bay of Bengal. In the coming years, the two states could deepen and expand the scope of their strategic cooperation for ensuring energy security and regional stability. The evolving security architecture in the maritime domain of the Bay of Bengal is likely to be shaped largely by the Sino-Indian dynamic. For ensuring a peaceful and stable maritime domain in the Bay of Bengal, India needs to address its security dilemma with China, pursuing a policy of cooperation with China where possible and competing where it might help mitigate the security dilemma between the two rising Asian powers. Now, given the widespread interest among the major powers to promote regional integration and the availability of multiple sources of funding, the Bay of Bengal littoral has a rare opportunity to come up with practical ideas for advancing the agenda on connectivity, commerce, and sustainable development of the littoral. Now, India and Japan need to acknowledge the fact that for attaining common strategic goals in the region, the two states need to identify new areas of regional collaboration among the littoral states through the existing regional frameworks of cooperation. Now, multilateral regional forums as the BIMSTEC, the IORA, the RECAP, and the IONS particularly provide platforms that enable India and Japan to deepen their strategic cooperation in the Bay of Bengal. Now, the common strategic interest and concern have propelled the former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to call Japan and India as natural allies. In fact, in one research interview with me, the former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe opined that India, as a resident power in the Indian Ocean, would be a critical partner of Japan in enhancing Japan's outreach into the Indian Ocean region, including the Bay of Bengal, in facilitating Japan's comprehensive engagement in the Bay of Bengal region through the existing bilateral, unilateral, and multilateral frameworks of cooperation for promoting a rules-based order in the region. The Prime Minister Abe also noted that India's importance as a net security provider in the region is going to increase in the future scenario. Now, given the deteriorating maritime security environment in the region, India and Japan are likely to intensify their ongoing maritime security cooperation, and India and Japan have a keen interest in maintaining the power equilibrium in the region, and as they do not want to see this critical geostrategic space to be dominated by any single state. The existing bilateral mechanisms, including the Japan-India Strategic Dialogue Track 2, the Annual Defense Ministerial Dialogue, the India-Japan Actist Forum, India-Japan 2+2 Dialogue, as well as the new Acquisition and Cross-Servicing Agreement, the AXA, all will enhance the strategic depth of the bilateral security and defense cooperation in the Bay of Bengal. India and Japan is expanding strategic cooperation at these levels for enhancing peace, stability, and security of the Bay of Bengal, to my mind, is likely to have a decisive impact in shaping the emerging security architecture of the Indo-Pacific. I would like to conclude my comments over there.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. Thank you. I think this is for bringing Japan into the discussion and for underscoring the factors that have been propelling this relationship forward. And in particular, I think bringing it to Bay of Bengal and perhaps how Japan views Bay of Bengal is an important part of this discussion, looking at the wider Indo-Pacific and what other partners with India can work insofar as the Bay of Bengal community is concerned. And we'll have, I think, aspects of this we'll have time to discuss once the initial remarks are over. So with that, let me invite Indrani Bagchi, Diplomatic Editor, Times of India, for her comments. Indrani, floor is all yours.
Yeah, thank you, Harsh, and apologies for joining in late. If I may say, Ambassador Mukhopadhyay articulated a lot of the stuff that I wanted to talk about, and let me at the outset completely agree with everything that Mukho said. As you know, he's one of our best diplomats. But just on a single point, in 2012, when Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was the chief guest at the Republic Day celebrations in Delhi, one of the issues that was discussed between Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and Shinzo Abe was the investment in the Chennai-Dawei corridor. And in fact, the Chennai-Dawei corridor at that time showed a lot of promise, because if I remember correctly, it was Yingluck Shinawatra who was the Prime Minister of Thailand at that point, and she had signed on to that particular project quite enthusiastically. In subsequent years, for a whole lot of reasons, that project went sort of has kind of run aground. And I do believe that there is a good case to revive the Chennai-Dawei corridor, particularly in today's context, because you are looking at, there is a greater emphasis on the eastern seaboard of India for the first time, and you're looking at Bay of Bengal. Look at Bay of Bengal not merely as an outpost or an entry port from the northeast, but from all of eastern India. And here my view would be that the states of Bengal, Orissa, Andhra and Tamil Nadu really need to look at themselves in a different light, maybe form a maritime group or to be able to leverage their coastal strengths. And Gautam was absolutely correct that since there has been very little investment in the primary economy in the Northeast, we would really be pushing, against windmills to be able to get Northeast to be the gateway to trade with Southeast Asia. But that is not true for all the other states on our eastern seaboard. And if you look at the beginnings of connectivity, the trade, the movement, cargo, freight between Kolkata and Chattogram, the Mongla ports, that is itself promising. And Gautam very correctly pointed out how the Sitwe port would actually be just an emergency use because of the silting issues in the Sitwe port. It is hard, and in fact I can say this, which is that the Kaladan multimodal project ending at the Sitwe port was an exercise in fantasy by the Indian government, because it was the least strategized, least considered multimodal project, and we are still paying the cost of that particular project. The alignment of the project is all wrong, and that is why we should look at other parts of the east of India's eastern coast to be able to use Bay of Bengal much more effectively. And a couple of things that one can look at instantly is Bay of Bengal is actually one of the richest homes for tuna fishing. And if you look at when you look at the problems that we have with fishermen between Tamil Nadu and Sri Lanka, there are two aspects to it. One is that the Indian fishermen actually pick up much more of the prawn wealth of that area, but nobody's picking up the tuna wealth. Tuna is one of the biggest. It's richly present in that entire area, and I only say this because we had a briefing by an expert on this. Like on the western coast and the Arabian Sea, the fish that is not picked up is the red snapper. Now, the interesting thing about all this fish is that these have huge international demand. But we have these things sort of wandering around our coasts, and nobody's even looked at this fish. It's nothing really, but just an illustration of the kind of things that we don't look at. So look at your 7 ports on your eastern seaboard. The way to leverage the Bay of Bengal would be to build massive connectivity to these ports from the industrial hubs, from the trading hubs and the production hubs of India. And in fact, that is what we need to work on in mission mode, really. Tourism, we've talked about tourism and maritime tourism and etc. is all there. Something that I would look at as a matter of concern in terms of security, not for anything else, but something that we should be addressing rapidly at this point, so it doesn't become a problem later, and that is the Rohingya crisis in Bangladesh. Now, if you look at this particular, there is one particular boat that is currently stranded in the Bay of Bengal with 80 people, now 64 because now 70 odd because 8 or 10 of them have died. Now these are Rohingya refugees literally being trafficked. Let us not mince words because 64 of them are women and girls. So being trafficked from Cox's Bazar to places in the Southeast Asia. This is a security concern that we should address at this point. Bangladesh is struggling. There's no doubt, no question on that front. Bangladesh is struggling with the Rohingya because, frankly, Rohingya have dropped off the map in terms of world attention. The first couple of years, people were paid money, etc., etc. They've dropped off the map. There's nobody who is interested, who can get Myanmar to take them back, unless we find some kind of a solution in the region. We will not be successful in getting the Western world to put sanctions on Myanmar and get them to take the Rohingya back. It's not going to work. So we have to find a much more creative solution. Otherwise, we are going to look at a kind of security crisis in the Bay of Bengal that we cannot imagine right now. But that might actually hamper the larger goal of making Bay of Bengal into your connecting bridge to Southeast Asia and East Asia. I will stop here now and we take questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Indrani. Thank you for pointing out 2 aspects which I think were very important. One, of course, looking at the entire stepping stone idea, not simply through the prism of Northeast, but entire the Eastern Seaboard, and the other one being the Rohingya issue and how that plays into the larger regional framework and what potentially it can and cannot do for our as we reimagine the larger Eastern geography. Last but not the least, let me invite Professor Masami Ishida, Professor at the Department of International Development Studies, Nihon University, Japan. Professor, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Harshpant. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Masami Ishida, Professor of Nihon University. First of all, it is a great honor for me to make a presentation at this important occasion, and I show my thanks to Observer Research Foundation for inviting me to this conference. And I'd like to share the PowerPoint. Could you see? Can you see?
We can see it, yeah.
Okay, okay. Ah. No, no, no. Oh, slideshow cannot be. Oh, no, no, no. Please, please don't start. I control by myself. Okay, thank you. Okay. First of all, I'd like to, the topic today presentation is the GMS Cross-Border Transport Agreement, CBTA. And in today's presentation, I introduce an experience of creating a rule for motor vehicles crossing border in the Greater Mekong sub-region, GMS, so in Southeast Asia. And the rule is called as Cross-Border Transport Agreement, CBTA. And the GMS is composed of Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam, Yunnan Province, and the Guangxi-Zhuang Autonomous Region of China. Background information. Please confirm the map of Greater Mekong sub-region. It's on the left. You can see the smaller scale of map and larger scale of map on the right-hand side. And the next and protocols of CBTA. And the CBTA is composed of main agreement and 16 annexes and 3 protocols. Among them, the important ones, for example, A4, Annex 4, facilitation of frontier crossing formalities. I will show you later about this annex. And A6, transit and inland customs clearance regime. And A8, temporary importation of motor vehicles. And the CBTA is intended to change the situation as shown in this picture, this first picture, to the second picture. The freely truck can cross the border. So brief history until ratification. It started in 1994, the discussion for the reducing the barrier at borders. And in 1994, UNSCAP resolution 4811 in 1992 was introduced, and it is composed of 7 conventions conducted in the world for the cross-border movement of vehicles, and mostly they are in Europe. And the consultant outsourced by the ADB, it creates a draft for the basic framework. And in 1999, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam, along the East-West Economic Corridor of the GMS, agreed to implement the basic framework. And in 2003, all the 6 countries signed and ratified the main agreement. And 2004, this basic framework has come to be called as CBTA. And 2007, all the countries signed all the annexes and the protocols. And in 2015, ratified all the annexes and the protocols. So it took more than 20 years since the inauguration of the discussion in 1994. Next, pilot case of single window and single stop at Vietnam-Laos border. This is based on the Annex 4. The Customs and the Ministry of Finance, Immigration and the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and the Quarantine, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Agriculture. And at the borders, the vehicle, the transport operators have to process its first process and second process and third process for each office. But under the single window system, customs, immigration, quarantine, we call it CIQ, can be conducted under one roof. It is set as a single window. And the next single stop inspection. When a truck transport from exporting country to importing country, the truck have to be inspected at the CIQ of exporting country. So this is first stop. And also at the importing country, the truck have to be inspected. So this is second stop, so 2 times. The single stop inspection, the CIQ of exporting country can be omitted. So the truck can go into the importing country directly, and the CIQ process is conducted only once, so first stop. So we call it single stop. Under single stop inspection system, common control area, CCA, is needed. In case that's a document inspection only, after passing the CIQ and checking the document, the truck can go to the destination directly. But in case that physical inspection is needed, the cargo have to be checked at the common control area. And so this is common control needed. So you can see on the picture upper left in 2008, there is nothing on the right-hand side of the border post. But on the picture lower left in 2015, you can see the common control area, right-hand side of the border post. And the situations of the border post you can see on the pictures on the right-hand side. And the single stop inspection for immigration is conducted. When I moved from Laos to Vietnam, I showed my passport to Lao immigration officer for deporting. And the Lao immigration officer checked my passport. And usually, Lao immigration officer handed the passport to me. But instead, the Lao immigration officer handed the passport to Vietnamese immigration officer and slide it in front of the Vietnamese officer, and I will be checked. And after being checked, the passport will be back to me. How to realize a single stop inspection? The staff of the customs and the immigration are divided into 2 groups, so group A and B. The Vietnamese group B staff are moved to Lao side. The Lao group B staffs are moved to Vietnamese side. If a truck come from Vietnam to Laos, the staff of the Laos and Vietnam conduct inspection jointly, so single stop can be possible. And as a result, according to the logistics forwarder survey I conducted in Vietnam in 2017, the time for crossing border at the Vietnam-Lao border is shorter than the Vietnam-Chinese border and the Vietnam-Cambodian borders. So this can be an effect of single-stop inspection. And on the other hand, but the customs clearance fee, especially in Laos side, are still high. So the time is be shortened, but the customs clearance fee is not still higher. And in Cambodia, actually more higher, further higher. So not only custom, and the police also ask for bribe, it is said. 3. Early harvest implementation of GMS CBTA. After ratification of all members, 1916, the joint committee was held. All the members consent unanimously. Amendment to CBTA are required for its full implementation because some provisions are outdated, and also agreed to launch the issuance and distribution of 500 GMS transport permits per one member country. In 1918, all 6 member countries signed the MOU on the early harvest implementation of the GMS CBTA at 6th meeting of the Joint Committee. From 1980 to 2018 to 2019, early harvest implementation of GMS CBTA started in 5 countries except Myanmar. And 2021, Myanmar will launch early harvest implementation, but it is not sure under the current situation. Next, temporary admission document, GMS road transport permit, issuing organization Cambodia, for example, to the domestic operators, 500 permits. The other countries also same, and Vietnam also give the 500 permits to transport operators. And the temporary admission document, TAD. The transport operator with GMS transport permit request TAD to the issuing organization. The issuing organization issued and give TAD to the transport operator. And then transport operator with TAD can cross the border freely. The condition of TAD, multiple temporary admission and valid for 12 months and can be extended. But vehicles pass through the designated routes of 5 other countries. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ishida. And I think this brings in a different element to our discussion, which will be, I think, a lot of us would be happy to take forward in the sort of question and answer session. I have a few points that I would that I would like you all to respond to, perhaps in the second half of this discussion. But before I do that, Ambassador Mukhopadhyay wanted to make a few more comments. Ambassador, if you have additional points to make, I think please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Pant. I mean, this kind of you, I could have covered it in the discussion. But if you give me the floor, just let me make 2 points. One is that, when I'm thinking in terms of connectivity from the Northeast and Bay of Bengal to the Indo-Pacific, basically I'm thinking of a dual track strategy. So you have a kind of maritime strategy, which is much more hooked on to, big capital, industry, value chains between the more advanced economies, or at least advanced parts of the country in many economies. But for the Northeast, in fact, it has to be a much more agri-based, much more focused on processing of the agri products, and much more focused on creating value from those products. And the second thing is, this is one thing that we are talking in terms of the Northeast, but effectively the economies of the entire region, what Mr. Ishida just spoke of as the GMS region, is a very similar economy. They are all similarly agri-based economies. So I would say that, in both cases, we also need a much stronger outward investment. In the value chain, in the maritime section, the outward investment would be obviously much more big industries in the value chain. But in the greater Mekong sub-region, starting from the Northeast, leading on to Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, it would be much more focused on the livelihoods of the people, which is largely in the agri-rural sector. I'd also like to thank Dr. Ghosh for bringing in the geopolitics of the Bay of Bengal, and Indrani for the the Bay of Bengal trade, the intra-Bay of Bengal trade, both of which I touched on in passing, and also in the case of Indrani to the point about the political situation. And this is presently actually even more strongly dramatized by the current situation in Myanmar. Under the present context, in fact, a lot of what we are debating will have to wait for the day when things in Myanmar stabilize. And also to Mr. Ishida for highlighting the soft connectivity aspects,
Yes.
which really greatly improve trade. So my point here is that China does this BRI, strategic projects. We could have a completely different strategy, which is focused not so much on connectivity and infrastructure, but in actual investment in the real economy of the people, which is 70% of the people. That means adding value to the rice that is grown, to the pulses that are grown in Myanmar, to the oil seeds that are grown, to the horticulture products, and finding markets for those products in a kind of chain link. So, while China talks about BRI, we should be thinking in terms of talking about a kind of chain link between the northeast of India and Vietnam. And Japan becomes a very, very important partner in that, because this is not something that we can do alone. We need to, in fact, complement our inward investment strategy with a much more robust outward investment strategy, an outward investment strategy that is much more focused on the grassroots and the livelihood sectors. And Japan can be a very important partner, not just in terms of infrastructure and connectivity, not just in terms of finance, but actually more than that, the institutional support, the due diligence, the management, the know-how, the technology. And I would say that Vietnam and Myanmar within this region could be two other very major strategic partners, and Singapore as the kind of financing partner from outside. And I want to say that while there's a lot of focus on the trilateral highway, I have personally traveled by road from Guwahati to Hanoi and Haiphong. And it's actually possible to go from Mandalay through Shan State. There is a friendship bridge between Laos and Myanmar directly into northern Laos, not far from the China border, and from there enter at Dien Bien Phu in northern Vietnam, much shorter. And similarly, one could take a kind of southern route from Laos down the Mekong, a kind of river route that goes all the way up to the delta. And I would like to invite through Dr. Ishida here, a serious Japanese interest in this, working together with Myanmar and Vietnam to look at a completely different strategy from the Chinese strategy, which is focused much more on the economy of the people, not only the economy of large industry. Thank you.
Sorry, I was getting far ahead of myself. I would just raise a few questions, I think, with all of you individually, because of slightly different takes that you have on our broader topic of the panel. So, Alex, can I just ask you to respond first and to come back to this? You had elucidated in your presentation this idea of Northeast and the insurgency-related problems that it continues to face, political economy of violence that continues to be there, irrespective of the fact that insurgency has gone down and the numbers have gone down, and therefore the role that Northeast can and cannot play is something that also Ambassador Mukhopadhyay touched upon in his presentation. So maybe if you can just elaborate a bit on where do you see this this discussion going from here, because we have seen one part of Northeast being tackled, which is the hard security. Perhaps today is being we are in a better position than we were before. But if you look in terms of positioning of Northeast, as we have been discussing over the last few minutes, as a gateway approach that creates its own set of problems that have been pointed out both by yourself and by Ambassador Mukhopadhyay. So in a sense, what role then for Northeast in terms of post-insurgency phase, in terms of the political economy of development, in terms of its ability to be that link, that yes, it's a problematic link, but link it is. And so what we can and what we cannot potentially do with it, with the kind of geography that Northeast and the opportunities that it presents to us. So any from your research, what have you been looking at, and what perhaps comes out of that for the larger discussion that we are having today about Bay of Bengal and about the ability of Northeast to be that bridge.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, please.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Yeah. So. Yeah, really interesting question, and thank you very much, and thank you to everyone else for some really interesting contributions today. I would kind of echo the sentiments of the ambassador, the excellent kind of talk that he had about this notion of connectivity being hollow without productivity, and the linkage between connectivity, productivity, and this continued situation of low-lying insurgency. I would say in terms of a way forward, I would draw particular attention to the resolution of the Naga peace process as being really quite essential to this, because of the geographic span it has in the region, how that, that plays such a significant role in this political economy of insurgency, and thus I think there needs to be an impetus in resolving this now. Of course, this hasn't been simple, as has been demonstrated in the last 2-3 years or so, where there's been efforts to bring about a speedy resolution, which have stalled somewhat. So I'd kind of, in my own research, I've really been thinking about the centrality of this Naga peace process in taking things forward, in this sense. They would be my kind of primary thoughts regarding positioning of the Northeast. I think that once the Naga peace process is approaching a resolution, I think that this would open up more kinds of opportunities. But they would be my kind of initial and early thoughts on that. But thank you otherwise, and I'm sure others would have interesting thoughts on this matter as well.
Dr. Ghosh, if I can, bring you into the discussion, because I think Ambassador Mukhopadhyay also touched upon Japan and what role it can play, and I was interested because you mentioned Bay of Bengal in particular as part of the future trends in India-Japan relations. So, if possible, can you elaborate some of the aspects of potential collaboration that that has potential of taking this partnership forward, and in particular its impact on the Bay of Bengal community, on the Bay of Bengal region, whether it isn't, you touched upon various aspects, maritime security, energy security, etc., and then rule of law, but what it means in operational terms insofar as the Indo-Japanese partnership is concerned, and what are a few things that we are looking at today when we talk of Indo-Japan partnership in the Bay of Bengal.
With regard to the Bay of Bengal focus, it's very important to see that Japan, I would like to sort of inform you about my one field visit there. When I was doing way back in 2006 doctoral studies, at that point of time there was hardly any interest to know about the geopolitical dynamics shaping up in this particular region, the Bay of Bengal, and also not much interest among the Japanese academic community to study to have an in-depth study of the political dynamics, geopolitical dynamics in the Indian Ocean region as well. The focus was more towards the Southeast Asian angle and the East Asian angle. But now, when after almost a decade and a half, I could find out that the focus has grown a lot. For the focus to study and understand the Indian Ocean region, particularly the Bay of Bengal part, amongst the academic community in Japan is growing, and not just in the academic community in Japan, but also through my research interviews at the policy making level, I also could understand that the interest from the policy making part is also growing to understand this regional dynamics and sort of how Japan could increase its presence in the region, and what are the avenues, and in that context Japan considers India to be a very critical partner, which would sort of facilitate in enhancing, Japan's strategic presence in the region. And in this context, say for instance, both India and Japan are sort of, seeking to collaborate with, the Bay of Bengal countries together. Say for instance, in the aspect of physical connectivity, improving physical connectivity. And one such country, you can say they're focusing on Bangladesh, for instance. They're focusing on, enhancing, physical connectivity, through engaging with, jointly engaging with Sri Lanka through joint venture projects. Then they're also sort of, thinking of, focusing on, say, for instance, Afghanistan. Afghanistan's, for instance, the Chabahar project, the Chabahar port area. So, the focus is growing that how, India and Japan can come together in sort of, enhancing the physical connectivity, the capacity building of the, smaller littoral states in the region, which would, further promote, and enhance regional stability in the, region as a whole, in the Indian Ocean region. So there are incremental steps which the two states are coming together and sort of, putting forward. And I think, in the, future, say for instance, in the within a decade or so, we will, be witnessing and observing more such developments in this line.
Thank you. Master Mukhopadhyay, if you can also respond to something that Indrani said, which I think was a potentially a very important point insofar as looking beyond the Northeast and the role of Eastern Seaboard. What are the possibilities there in terms of looking at the Bay of, in the entire Bay of Bengal, because our idea of Bay of Bengal and idea of BIMSTEC has largely been focused around Northeast, and as we have been discussing, there are these fundamental issues there. So how can we expand this ambit of to the entire Eastern Seaboard, and what potentially can be done and perhaps cannot be done in that regard? Master, you are mute. You're still on the mute. Yeah.
Thank you. As you said, the focus has been on the Northeast, and on the other hand, it's been on the Indian Ocean trade, and the Bay of Bengal has actually fallen in between. And even BIMSTEC, which actually is the B stands for the Bay of Bengal. The Bay of Bengal is buried in a kind of alphabet soup. So that nobody really realizes that this is about the Bay of Bengal, not just about South Asia and Southeast Asia. So I would say, there's actually a strong historical precedent in the Bay of Bengal trade, and one just has to see the role of the Chulia Tamils and in the, which is very well sort of showcased in Sulin Amrit's book on the Bay of Bengal trade. So there's always been an intra-Bay of Bengal trade, and that, of course, was ruptured along with the colonial trade brought in by the British. So that kind of traditional trade disappeared. So if we look at it, the eastern seaport of India, Indrani was very right in talking about Bengal, Orissa, Andhra, and even further down to Chennai, is in effect in this Bay of Bengal area, if you leave aside Malaysia and bits of Thailand, is really among the more developed economies of this region. And also port building has now picked up quite a lot. So I would say if there is a single area to focus on, it should be the blue economy, because the blue economy can bring the littoral states of the Bay of Bengal together. But I would also sort of warn against the kind of resource exploitation that was almost implicit in what Indrani said about tuna fishing or red snapper fishing. I think today, if we have to go into blue economy development, we have to go with very strong environmental considerations in mind, and environmental protections in mind, and conservation issues in general, so that everything that we do must come under the sign of sustainability. And we should not do in the Bay of Bengal, which has been so far relatively untouched, what has happened in many other seas and many other waters.
Thank you. Indrani, taking this forward, this issue of BIMSTEC. I think one of the things that has happened in the last few years is that we now know that BIMSTEC exists. We now know what it means. So there's, despite its longevity, the awareness has grown. but what is happening in operational terms, and why is it? Because you hear different different articulations from different capitals of BIMSTEC. What is the what in your assessment are the fundamental problems that we have seen? Is it simply about resourcing? Is it simply about resourcing an organization or a platform, or is it something beyond that that has not really allowed it to take off in the way that perhaps even despite our efforts over the last few years, we have not seen the operational aspects being that fruitful? So what is going on?
So my view would be that BIMSTEC lacks a fundamental theme. And Mukho was completely right when he said that we don't actually focus on the Bay of Bengal itself. The Bay of Bengal, I think once the Bay of Bengal itself becomes a point of attraction, you will find states engaging with on that central idea. That central idea has to be built. And Mukho, while you're completely correct about not making this a commercial issue, on the fishing front, one of the things that I always look at is the port of Chokfu and the Chinese. The Chinese are literally fishing marauders of the world. They ruin seas. But the point is, before, whether the Chinese put up a naval base over there or not, and I think that may be a while away, they will certainly bring those their fishing trawlers and the fishing militia there before we know. And it might not be such a bad idea for us to mark out that space before the Chinese discover that this part of the seas. You know what they say about Bay of Bengal, right? That the fish in Bay of Bengal die of old age. It's the only part. But yes, so I'm saying that before the Chinese get to it, because they have no such considerations. So unless we step in there with the kind of environmental standards, maritime standards, fishing standards and norms, and force the Chinese to accede to them, if we let them get the first mover advantage in exploiting the commercial prospects in the Bay of Bengal, we would be the loser. But to go back to your question, Harsh, on BIMSTEC.
Indrani,
yeah,
spoken like a true Bengali.
I was going to say the same. Look at here, 3 Bengalis talking about fish in the Bay of Bengal.
Absolutely. But
like an outsider, yes. Talking about Bay of Bengal and all that.
But you have to understand the importance.
That's why you're moderating.
Yes. So to go back to BIMSTEC. So I think we need to build the central idea of Bay of Bengal as a commercial strategic entity before the states around the Bay of Bengal. Honestly, India is the biggest there. Can rally around that central idea, and that central idea has not yet been developed.
Explaining BIMSTEC, and as part of the Bay of Bengal community, the standard setting, particularly on environmental and other issues, could be a very important component.
Thank you. So finally, let me turn to Professor Ishida. Professor Ishida, you made a very interesting presentation. I hope, can you hear me?
Yes.
And these softer aspects of connectivity that you talked about in the Greater Mekong area. I was just wondering if you can, take a step forward in that presentation and just tell us briefly in terms of analytics, what worked and what did not work in that case. When we are looking at the connectivity, physical connectivity in that case in the Greater Mekong area, what are the lessons that can be drawn, for example, if we are looking at greater connectivity, for example, in Bay of Bengal? Now, what is it that is working there that perhaps we need to replicate, and what are some of the negative lessons that are available to us
so the lesson to
thinking about connectivity?
northeast in India. Okay.
No, broadly in terms of connectivity itself,
Oh, I see.
not simply in terms of northeast.
It's in the Greater Mekong sub-region. Actually, it took more than 20 years for the realization of the free transport, and still on the way. But we'll be very close to the realization now. And regarding it can be expanded to the northeast India also, because actually I had conducted a study about the territorial highway for the project of the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia area. And in accordance with my experience for the study, I compared with CBTA and the BBIN motor vehicle agreement scale. Actually, its scale is smaller compared with CBTA. The number of the article is 17 articles and 3 annexes. And the CBTA, actually, all the articles, including the annex and the protocols, 407. So totally different. But it's so many articles. It took much time for realization. So to realize the motor vehicle cross-border trips between BBIN countries and also GMS countries, in my view, the best way to conduct the early stage, the simplest way with minimum rules is the best one. A rule that BBIN countries accede to the GMS CBTA, and the GMS CBTA accede to BBIN MBA is important at the early stage. And in the midterm run, it is better to harmonize the BBIN motor vehicle agreement and the GMS CBTA with a very simple version, like the early harvest implementation rule of the GMS are introduced at the last part of my presentation. Actually, the number of the articles can be just only 10. Compared with 407, it is very smaller. And in the long run, if it is needed, the harmonization of the whole article of the CBTA and the BBIN-MBA can be considered. With the experience of the CBTA, so I think the full-fledged cross-border movement agreement is not necessary at the early stage. At the early stage, simpler rule is better. That is I think my lesson from the experience in Mekong region. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ishida. We have just 5 or 7 minutes left. So I'll just briefly ask you all to go back to the theme of the panel. And if you can just elaborate in 1 or 2 minutes, what do you think in terms of, we have discussed a lot of challenges, a lot of opportunities, the geopolitics and some of the connectivity issues that are emerging in the region, in the Bay of Bengal. So when you look at the wider Indo-Pacific, and when we have been having this discussion now about Bay of Bengal as a stepping stone to the wider Indo-Pacific, what realistically do we see in terms of Bay of Bengal being able to achieve that role or being able to play that role in the near future, or are there, given the challenges that we have discussed, that still this is a step-by-step process that we need to take into account? Let me start by Alex, and then we'll go in the same.
Sure, thank you. So, I mean, I'll be very brief because my research is primarily focusing on within the Northeast, but thinking about in terms of broader outlook. From what I've kind of learned during the discussions today, thinking about some of these things, I would say that it seems as though there are quite significant kind of challenges that lie ahead with it. I think in terms of thinking about the role for the Northeast, I think from my point of view, from my own research, that it's interesting hearing about the role of the eastern seaboard of India as well as another potential opportunity. From the perspective of thinking about the Northeast in terms of peace building, I think there does need to be some kind of role. Then it needs to play some kind of role, but just need to be cognizant of the intimate relationship between security and development in the region, and the ways that any new developments in terms of attempting to haul the Northeast into this wider architecture might intersect with localized security dilemmas and political economies. That was my kind of thinking about what wider role for the Northeast. But yeah, I'll defer to my colleagues who will have some more insightful analysis of the bigger picture, I'd say. Thank you.
Ambassador, you're muted.
The first point I would say is that if there is one point I would like to make, it is to enhance cross-border investment. I talked about the asymmetry on the land trade, but even if we look at the overall maritime trade with ASEAN, after we signed the FTAs, there was a brief period. Am I audible? Because both of you are frozen.
Yeah.
Okay. So after we signed the ASEAN FTAs, for a brief period, there was a fillip in the trade, but after that, trade plateaued and even declined. And all the ASEAN FTAs that we have, comprehensive agreements that we have signed, comprehensive economic agreements, are with the more developed economies. Now, in India, we tend to think of outward investment as a kind of net outflow or a net loss from inward investment that is to contribute to jobs and domestic development. But in fact, we really need to look at investment in a kind of cyclical fashion. And if we were to even earmark a portion of our official lines of credit and convert them into buyer's credit and seller's credit, we would actually get much better quality of projects, and we would make a much stronger penetration into the market.
Ambassador, we lost you. Okay, so he can get back later. And let me go back to Dr. Ghosh.
Yeah, in terms of quick comment, I would like to say that, there are a lot of complexities and challenges to the Bay of Bengal regional landscape, particularly the regional security landscape. And in order to sort of I think the need of the hour is to also focus on how to promote regional stability and security in the region, because there are a lot of issues which are sort of hampering the regional security. And the first and foremost focus should be on having a peaceful regional order. And in order to achieve the peaceful and stable regional order, the maritime powers, major maritime powers, say for instance the resident power India, which is a resident power, and like-minded partners of India, like say for instance the United States, Japan, Australia, and others, they can sort of come together and sort of focus on how they could help out the littoral states in the Bay of Bengal in areas of humanitarian and disaster relief, because we should not lose sight of the fact that this is a region which is sort of facing a huge amount of environmental catastrophes. We recently had the Amphan, which was so critically affected. The people at large were so critically affected. So the major powers can come together and sort of help out in capacity building of the smaller littoral states in management of in the area of HADR, in maritime domain awareness, and likewise activities which would sort of promote a wholesome capacity building of these states, as well as sort of enhance their confidence building, as well as sort of help them in having a more regional stable order. So I think that is a very important contribution India and like-minded countries can make in this region.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. Ambassador, we lost you. We had lost you. So if you want to just conclude.
The second point, sorry, my apologies. I think there was a drop in my signal. So the second point I was basically making was, a multiplicity of agencies in the Northeast involved in security, development, trade, connectivity, and really no single direction. And very often working at tangent or even at cross purposes. And I was giving examples like MHA, responsible for the ICP, the Ministry of Commerce not having personnel to send to the ICP, the Foreign Ministry involved in connectivity in Myanmar, but the Ministry of Surface Transport involved in connectivity in the Northeast. A multiplicity of issues, which actually aggravate the disjunctions between security, development, and foreign relations, and no clear holistic look and no clear direction that takes into account backward, forward linkages and looks at the whole region in its entirety. And I would say, it's very important in our Act East, Indo-Pacific, and everyone to include Bangladesh, precisely because the natural drainage of the Northeast goes through Bangladesh. Somehow, Bangladesh is out of our, map of our Act East and IPOI map. And even it's there in our Bay of Bengal map, but not playing such an important role. So I think we need to look at these 2-3 things. Outward investment, coordination between the agencies, and inclusion of Bangladesh as a part of our Act East strategies.
Thank you so much, sir. Indrani?
Yeah, I think Mukho is absolutely correct. Involvement of Bangladesh is really quite critical. I noticed that the first reference to Bangladesh in the Indo-Pacific was made only last week. Not even last week. This but to go back to my point is, I would involve the states. I would involve Bengal, Orissa, Andhra, and Tamil Nadu for them to make to work on both connectivity solutions, investment solutions, and economic solutions that feed into each other, and that would in some way counter the kind of multiplicity of agencies that Mukho spoke about, which he's absolutely right. And it's not just in the Northeast; it's all over India. I mean, just the whole idea of the blue economy or maritime security or domain awareness, all of this is handled by different silos, and we need to integrate them. And I would give the states much greater stake in this, and I would give the states much greater responsibility for this, instead of having this constant top-down approach from Delhi. So yeah, that's the only thing I would say.
Thank you. Professor Ishida, your concluding remarks.
Okay, thank you. And regarding connectivity, actually, the land connectivity and the maritime connectivity have to be separately considered. Regarding the maritime connectivity, I think the sea transport should be open and free. And important is developing the deep sea port is important, but not for military use, but for commercial use. That is important for flourishing of the economy. And regarding the land transport, by connecting the cities and a city A and the city B along the economic corridor, by connecting the development of the city A and the city B can be grown. And flowering the city along the corridor is important. So in this meaning, I hope for the northeast to the connectivity from Myanmar to northeast India, as well as good and safe transport from Kolkata and New Delhi to northeast India is also important. That is my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you all. This has been a very fascinating discussion. I think we have covered a very panoramic view of the Bay of Bengal and what it means. And perhaps I think the most interesting part and the most productive part has been the awareness, I think, even for me, of the challenges that continue to infest some of these issues that we discuss on a day-to-day basis. But I think many of us are not aware of the challenges on the ground, and so many of you brought those challenges to the fore in this discussion. Thank you all very much, and this has been a very productive engagement. And I hope some of the issues that we have discussed here become part of the growing body of literature that is emerging on Bay of Bengal, both in terms of policy as well as in the academia. Thank you again for this wonderful interaction.